So what is up, Lord Nick here, bringing you another League of Legends related video. And in this video, guys, we're going to be talking about personal responsibility, blame, and criticism, and how all three of these things kind of correlate to one another, and how you can kind of differentiate these. And just a heads up before this is a very subjective video. This is all opinionated based off of my own experience with them and my own struggle with differentiating these from time to time. And one of the biggest things I can say is kind of a disclaimer right above all of this is that while this talks about them in kind of a general manner, each one has to be taken within scrutiny of the scenario itself. Sometimes people are blaming you, which is a aspect of, and calling it criticism, which is not always fair. That is not an always fair thing to you. Fair criticism is somebody who should be in the role to criticize you, but that being said, their intent should be to helping you improve. Now, if their tonality and their objective seems to be putting you down or making you feel bad about something that you did, this is strictly what blame is, and that's kind of going to be our rough definition for blame here. We're going to get into the full definitions of each of these things, along with an idea of what general responsibility is, as to differentiate responsibility into categories that are a little easier to understand. So starting off, let's actually start off with our definitions of these words that I'm throwing around here, and kind of so that we can get an idea as to why they're important when referring to League of Legends in general. So the first thing we're going to be talking about here is personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is when you take full accountability for your actions, decisions, thoughts, and more. So what does that mean, really, right? Like, because that seems very vague. That seems very general. You know, we think that we all take some type of accountability for our actions. You know, we're using these words responsibility and accountability kind of interchangeably in this definition to a degree. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is we are aware we made a mistake, and we are owning up to the fact we made a mistake. So much like how a little kid tries to be like, well, I didn't eat the cookie from the cookie jar, it might have disappeared. That's a kid trying to deflect responsibility. Now, a parent who is, getting mad at them because they think they're spoiling their dinner is placing blame on the factor and making the situation seem like something a kid doesn't really want to own up to. And oftentimes as a child, we get into this mindset that we don't want to take responsibility, because oftentimes responsibility to us gets defined by the fact that we're going to get punished because it's a mistake. Responsibility also means that you take the good with the bad, right? Like, having personal responsibility should mean that you get praised for doing good things, along with blamed for doing bad things, or criticized for bad things. And so let's move into those two words there, right? Blame and criticize, just so that we kind of have a definition to them. Criticize is to find fault. The definition of criticizing something is actively looking for the fault in something. So when you are critiquing, when you are giving criticism, when you are looking to actively potentially help somebody, your intention is to find fault. Blame is where you are assigning that fault to a specific person or individual or entity, in terms of to kind of define who it is that caused the fault. So there is a problem between criticizing and blaming. So blaming is also just saying assigning responsibility. The actual definition is assigning responsibility for a fault or a wrong. So already we kind of have an idea as to why this is kind of an oddball and hard topic to potentially do this. Personal responsibility involves taking accountability for the actions that you have done, your thoughts that you have made, and decisions that you have also made, and sometimes the words that you may have spoken, stuff like that. Blame is where somebody is assigning that responsibility to you. You know, if you made a mistake and somebody starts saying you've effed up, this is what you did wrong, they are blaming you. That being said, they can also be critiquing you, and I think the biggest difference between the two is the intention between the two. Criticism comes with blame. You just can't criticize something without blaming something half the time. You can, but that is specifically and ultimately just an objective critique. Like, I felt like this Gragas combo is really bad. They're not saying that you did a really bad Gragas combo. They're just critiquing that Gragas combo. Maybe they don't like that you W-E-N, because it forces you to have to do the W after the E before you can do almost anything else. or it takes extra time, and so a better combo would just be to ER. Instead of charging up that W, you use E and R so that you can get the R off. That instantly launches them back into your team. There's a lot of things about that kind of defines what critique is opposed to blame. Blame is going to be more on the idea that, hey, that was a bad combo, and you should realize that you shouldn't do that combo again. At that point, they're making it personal. At that point, they're putting it on you. So I think that the difficulty within finding critique and blame within League of Legends is identifying, because there's a personal aspect to blame, and many times when somebody critiques, they add a personal aspect on it in an attempt to make you take personal responsibility for what's going on. This is both good and bad because it can backfire from the intent of what the criticism is supposed to be doing. Criticism is supposed to be highlighting where the faults are, and then blame highlights them and makes them personal and can make them feel like an attack. And I struggle with this particularly, right? When I am critiquing somebody, I try my damnedest to not be like associating blame to them, even if the scenario does justify blame. Which there are scenarios that justify you putting blame on a person. That being said, there are many scenarios that justify putting no blame on anybody because it's a mistake that anybody could have made and that everybody probably does make. And, you can't really blame the person, or maybe they were ignorant to the scenario. Maybe they did not know that this was a mistake. So instantly blaming somebody for making a mistake can make them want to deflect the blame and deflect the mistake because they didn't realize it's a mistake. And this is a differentiation that somebody needs to make when they are attempting to coach or criticize or assist in the learning of somebody else. And within yourself, you also have to be able to not self-blame and be able to be self-critical and be critical of oneself. I am very hard and critical on myself to the point that I blame myself for a lot of things that have gone wrong in my life, and I always try to analyze where I think I went wrong. Now, there is a step between this of victim blaming and becoming victim mindset, and they're very close tied topics, and we're not going to go fully into both of these just because they're their own topic in and of themselves. But when you're talking about these two topics, one of the biggest things is you could be a victim of somebody blaming you and intentionally trying to cause harm on you because they themselves are upset with their own actions and how they feel. You could also just be getting criticized and you're taking it in a personal way because you already have a mindset where you know what you did was wrong and what you did caused issues for you and your team, specifically in League of Legends. We're going to keep this as a League of Legends lesson for a bit. You're the reason that this thing went wrong, and you know that, and then somebody's criticizing the play that led up to it going wrong, and now you're taking it as a personal attack because you were already feeling guilty about the scenario. So when you start taking something personally, you have to be able to step back and look at it objectively to see what the person is saying. Are they saying this as a critique, or are they saying this as blame? And this goes also on the side of the person who's trying to criticize. You have to be able to look at the scenario and judge, are you blaming this person or are you critiquing this person? You have to find the difference between the two. If your comment is something along the lines of, well, if you just did this, we would have won here. One, you're looking at results, what you assume to be results-based oriented thinking, and two, you're making this personal to that person. You were intentionally telling them, hey, if you just did this, we wouldn't have lost this. You're not owning up to the fact that, hey, they didn't do that and you didn't respond to the scenario properly. You're looking at exactly what that person did and you were associating blame to them. And if you weren't even involved in the scenario, for instance, you're an outside spectator looking at this, you have to say you're both right and you're both wrong. You have to be able to take both sides of it opposed to taking one side. And the problem is, as human beings, we are biased. We're going to take one side that we align with more than the other. Much like how I am taking one side of this video to tell you that there is blame more often than critique by coaches and by people who are trying to assist you, right? So when we're looking at personal responsibility, right, like let's go back to that main topic here. What do we mean by taking responsibility for your actions then, if not to then take blame for the actions or criticism for the actions? Well, what we mean to do is you look at the situation and Could the results have been different? Well, yeah, but that's results-oriented thinking. You don't want to look at just what the results of it would have been if you did something else, but you need to look at why the scenario that you chose was particularly egregious or a mistake. You then also have to look at what could have been your other opportunities in those scenarios. What other choices could you have made? What choices did you make that led to these scenarios? Because oftentimes when you're making a giant macro decision in League of Legends, you're having decisions that are leading up to it, or you're making no decisions at all and you're just choosing to go into it. Choosing to go into it blind is a mistake. That is your decision that you made that's a mistake, is that you didn't critically think of the situation and evaluate if it was a good idea or not. And that's a bad idea. That's a bad process in and of itself. Now, if you are thinking about it objectively and you're thinking about how you can make this a overall better scenario, right? Like what you could have done differently, or what you could still do because of the bad scenario, how can you turn it around, stuff like that. And when you start looking at it in an objective tone, you're going to be looking at it with less personal attachment to it, and this is where you can actually grow from it. Honestly, the oddball to it is personal responsibility requires you to not take such a personal attachment to it, but it does make you have to become aware that it was your actions that led to it. So it's such an odd thing. It is assigning personal responsibility assigns accountability to the actions, decisions, and thoughts that led up to the result, but not necessarily a personal responsibility for the result, if that makes sense. It's a very odd line to look at, differentiating it, but all the things that led up to you having that result was because of actions you took, or thoughts you had, or decisions you made, or all of the above not having been done properly, or you just not doing any of them in general, in which then, yeah, you have an attachment to it, but it's not necessarily attaching yourself to the end all result. If your only justification of, man, my only, my self-value in League of Legends is going to be off of me winning the game, then ultimately you're looking at results-oriented thinking, which is not actually good personal responsibility. You're not taking account of what you did during the game and things you could do during the game to make your own gameplay better. You're looking at the results of the game. You're looking at how, if you're winning or not, and your self-worth is tied very honestly to the end result, which means that you're not looking critically at the things that led to said end result. So you have to take a step back, look at your actions, take responsibility for what you did up into the loss, and then realize, okay, I can move from this forward and go forth with it. Personal responsibility, I think, becomes easier when you're not having another person trying to associate what it is that you need to become personally responsible for, which still, in its own right, also makes it somewhat harder, right? Because, yeah, now you don't have somebody telling you what your mistakes were, but if you can't realize what the mistakes were on your own, it doesn't become easier to understand them now that you're not, you're not focused, you don't have somebody else telling you it. It actually becomes more difficult to realize, oh, shit, I messed up here. How you messed up here. Not necessarily that you did, but then the how and the why. These are things that become more difficult to analyze without the assistance of others sometimes. More so than you did mess up, because you may have been like, oh, I messed up, but now you're not looking at the things that led to you making the mistake, and that's the big part that is personal responsibility, is leading up to, yeah, you know what, if I just did this, this would have never happened. I'm sorry, that's a mistake that I made. When you're getting blamed for a result, it's not critique anymore either, so remember that. Looking directly at the result and then assigning who is responsible for that result, without going into hey, these are the actions you took that led to that result. Just saying, you fucked up in this spot here, and that's what led to this result. Opposed to being like, okay, well, what were the compounding factors? Were there people calling for that? And yeah, you made a misplay, and it's obvious you made a misplay there. Or was it the fact that you just decided on your own to do this play, and that's what led to that result? And that's, again, we're kind of talking in circles to a small degree here, because the topic is kind of circular in some ways. blame kind of feeds on, critique can feed to the feeling of being blamed. Personal responsibility, while taken the wrong way, feels like a blame game. Sometimes, because, while somebody can criticize you, that doesn't always mean that they themselves are also taking responsibility for their actions, and that can feel just as bad, if not worse, when they're constantly, you could be taking responsibility for your actions, but then this person just keeps adding more and more and more and more and more to you. That type of blame can really negatively impact your ability to want to take personal responsibility for the actions of things that you've done. So all in all, guys, that's kind of been the topic of the video. Hopefully you guys understand what I was trying to get across. Hopefully this is somewhat insightful to you. Maybe understanding blame and critique is now a little bit easier for you. Maybe you can move forward and use this little bit of information and knowledge that I'm giving towards you or thoughts. I can't really say information and knowledge, but at least opinions that I'm giving towards you help you be able to establish your own and understanding how you need to grow in your own journey in League of Legends and in life in general. If you like the video, leave a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed, leave a comment telling me about your own personal battle with potentially criticism, blame, and personal responsibility and accountability. I know I said I was going to talk about general responsibility, but I felt like as the video went on, general responsibility is kind of its own topic that I think can detract from the personal responsibility conversation. I've made the video a couple of times, and I think that the more I talk about general responsibility, it just kind of muddies the water a little bit more. So if you guys want to see a video about general responsibility, I'm perfectly fine making a video about that in the future, and explaining how it correlates to this topic. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.